Who are the greatest NFL players for every NFL team? What's going on, football fans? It's Mitch back here with part 2 of the 5 greatest players ever to play for all 32 NFL teams. That's right, a list made by me. I did my research. I've studied up. I've got the stats to prove it. This is my top 5 with one honorable mention for each team. The greatest players ever to play for your favorite team, and I want to hear from you, the fan. Let me know if you agree with my opinion on the 5 greatest players for your favorite team in the comment section below. Gronk, spike the like button for more NFL content just like this. I rank everything. So Gronk, spike the like button if you want more NFL rankings, and subscribe for those rankings to make sure you get the next upload, bro. And let's have some fun, man. This is just my opinion on the greatest players ever to play on all 32 teams. No pressure, right? These are the 16 teams that I didn't talk about in part 1. And if you didn't check out part 1, go check it out, man, because I spent a lot of time on these lists. And these lists were not easy. We're going to kick it off with a list that certainly was very difficult, and I'm going to have one controversial name that is not included on the list. So let's kick it off with the Las Vegas Raiders. The Raiders, the silver and black, are one of the best franchises of all time and have had tons of success, especially in the 70s, right? Even a bit of the 80s, the 60s. They were an iconic NFL franchise, which has since maybe deteriorated a bit in the 2000s and the 2010s, but still the iconic logo, jerseys, all of it. So a lot of history with the Raiders, and a lot of people are instantly going to say, Mitch, where is Kenny Stabler? And here's the thing about these lists. Sometimes I had to choose, okay, the players that were most iconic. Sometimes I had to choose the best players. And so Stabler was an MVP for a year, a Super Bowl champ. But if we're talking about the 6 greatest players to ever play for the Raiders, there are so many Hall of Famers, and Stabler just doesn't quite make the cut. I love him. He brought the bravado and the energy and that nonchalantness, the cool factor to the Raiders that's so important. So he's almost a second honorable mention, right? But I had to put Dave Casper as the honorable mention. And the reason is the holy roller, the ghost to the post. Think of those plays. How can you not have Dave Casper the 4 straight years All-Pro at the tight end position, arguably the best tight end of the 70s on your list? Stabler was maybe the 3rd or 4th best quarterback of the 70s. So for me, that's why I went Dave Casper here. And going from the top back down to the bottom, Jim Otto is the best Raider of all time in terms of quality of player. I mean, he went to 10 times? What? First team All-Pro. He's arguably the greatest center of all time. 6 in a row All-Pro seasons to start a career is unheard of, especially for a center. He was an AFL champ in 1967, and in 1967, he led an offensive line and an offense that scored 468 points in 1967. That's 33 points per game in 1967, which is outrageous. This offensive line was the identity of the Raiders. Everybody does think of the hard-hitting, the dirtiness, the cheating a little bit, right, on the field, all that sort of stuff, the John Madden of it, the Al Davis of it. But at the core of this football team was the offensive line, led by Jim Otto, led by guys like Gene Upshaw, who was a 5-time first-team All-Pro, 2-time Super Bowl champ, 75th and 100th anniversary team member, most consecutive starts to begin a career in NFL history, Gene Upshaw, with 231. And if they didn't think of Gene Upshaw and Art Shell, who won 2 Super Bowls, was a 2-time All-Pro, was an 8-time Pro Bowler, was a All-70s offensive lineman, was later a coach in the NFL for the Raiders, a 100th anniversary team. If they didn't think of Art Shell, if they didn't think of Gene Upshaw or Jim Otto and the power of the running game and the offensive line, then they thought of maybe Willie Brown and the defense. Willie Brown, a 4-time All-Pro. 6 out of 8 playoff seasons in which he played, he had an interception in that playoff season. He had the 75-yard interception return in the Super Bowl. Willie Brown is one of the greatest corners of all time and often does not get recognized for that fact. But he brought the speed, the physicality, and the game sense in the big moments for the Raiders. So that is my top 6 for the Las Vegas Raiders. My 5 plus my honorable mention and Dave Casper, and then also kind of Kenny Stabler at the same time. Let's move to the next team, which is the Los Angeles Chargers, or I'm going to say it, the San Diego Superchargers. The Chargers. San Diego. None of this LA stuff. We're back into San Diego. And at number 1, I've got Lance Allworth. Jerry Jones' favorite player of all time. Why? Because he was one of the most electrifying wide receivers of all time. Number 19, a 3-time yards leader, a 3-time touchdown leader, a 3-time reception leader, a 6-time All-Pro, the AFL Player of the Year as a wide receiver in 1963 with 7 1,000-yard seasons in a row. Guys, Lance Allworth had 1,602 yards in the year 1965. 1,600 yards. And I don't even think that's in, was it 14 games? It might have been 12. I think it was 14. 23.3 yards per catch is outrageous. Lance Allworth was one of the greatest deep threats of all time. He invented the deep threat, bro, in the AFL. And the AFL and the style of Lance Allworth and that passing attack really kind of ignited that NFL-AFL merger and this AFL surge of having this more electrifying and, air it out type of style of ball that then went on to influence the rest of, the game. So Lance Allworth was very critical as a player to both the Chargers and the inception of the team, and then also the NFL in general. So that's why he's my number 1. At number 2, Kellen Winslow, senior. Arguably the greatest tight end to come along before this most recent era of like Gronk and Kelsey. In my opinion, Winslow is still on the Mount Rushmore of tight ends in NFL history, especially when it comes to receiving. Why? 3-time All-Pro. Led the NFL in receptions 2 times as a tight end, which again is unheard of. People do not lead the NFL in receptions at the tight end position, okay? He did it twice in the 80s when tight ends didn't really catch the ball that much. He had 1,290 yards in the year 1980, 6th in MVP voting. In 1981, he was 6th in that MVP voting. I'm not sure how he didn't get an MVP vote in 1980. He had 3 1,000-yard seasons in total. And in 1982, he might have had his best season of his career, but he got injured. He actually had 5 100-yard games out of 8. And he still was named an All-Pro because he was that good in the shortened season. So, Kellen Winslow is a dog. Dog. Okay? One of my favorite old-school tight ends to watch on the tape, on the highlights. There's just that iconic image of him. I think it's against the Dolphins, where he's being carried off after an unbelievable game of carrying the offense on his back, and hugely influential in that Air Coryell style offense that went on to inspire tight ends down the road, but also passing attacks down the road. LaDainian Tomlinson is at number 3. I know him as LT, the 2006 MVP, in which he scored 31 touchdowns, which back then I didn't know how outrageous that was when I was 10 years old, but it was outrageous. 31 touchdowns has never even been, nobody's been close since. 31 touchdowns. He was also the Offensive Player of the Year, a 3-time All-Pro. He was a 2-time rushing leader, a 2-time touchdown leader, and he also caught 100 passes in the year 2003. He was an all-around running back who could hit the home run, who could run you over, who could hurdle you, who could catch a screen pass and go for a long ways. LT was like the most complete back maybe ever. Like, he had everything. Elusiveness, power, hands, all of it. All of it. Unbelievable player. And, you know, one of my favorites, maybe my favorite running back growing up. Then at number 4, Junior Seau, who I honestly think might be one of the most underrated defensive players ever to play. Because you look at his career, he's never really brought up among the Jack Lamberts and the Mike Singletaries and the Ray Lewises and Dick Butkuses, but he's right there. I mean, 6-time All-Pro is top-notch, arguably the best middle linebacker of the 90s, led a really suspect 1994 Chargers team to a Super Bowl run in which he led the NFL in tackles that season. And then, you know, he had 3 7-sack seasons. This was not just a guy that could tackle, but he was also a good pass rusher, a sack guy as well. And then, you know, he went on in his later years to play for the Dolphins and even my Patriots down the road. But as a Charger, 6-time All-Pro, you know, big-time player, and maybe not really understood because of him playing for the Chargers. Let's just be honest. At number 5, Dan Fouts. Dan Fouts is my number 5. And he was, I think, a lot better than people remember in terms of his statistics because he didn't win a Super Bowl. So he's often forgotten. But he led the NFL in yards, passing yards, 4 straight seasons, which I don't know if anyone else has done that. 4 straight seasons in a row. That probably hasn't been done in the Super Bowl era other than Dan Fouts. He's a 2-time All-Pro, a 1-time Offensive Player of the Year in 1982. He did not win an MVP, but he was second in the MVP race twice. And he threw for 4,802 yards in 1981. Like, this guy had a Dan Marino-like 1984 season in 81, like 3 years previous. He had 4,800 yards, which is crazy for that time, and 33 touchdowns. So, Dan Fouts was a prolific passer in a very influential offensive scheme. Antonio Gates is my honorable mention. 8 straight Pro Bowls, 3 straight All-Pro seasons, 2 1,000-yard seasons, and a touchdown specialist, 4 10-plus touchdown seasons, was able to box out linebackers, safeties, due to his basketball skills, which is where, Tony Gonzalez was found and transferred. Antonio Gates was the next in line. But Gates was arguably faster, more physical, right? Gonzalez was more of a nuanced player, but Gates was a great athlete. And he was also a pretty good blocker, having to play in that system with, LaDainian Tomlinson involved in the run game. And then Gates was that option off play action over the middle of the field that was really, really big for Drew Brees and Phillip Rivers of that era. So he's my honorable mention for the Chargers. Low-key, one of the greatest tight ends of all time. My Los Angeles Rams list. At number 1, A lot of people will have Aaron Donald, but I'm going with Deacon Jones. I just find Deacon Jones, and maybe this is because of the time that is really gone on, he is almost a mythological figure in NFL history to me. I remember hearing about Deacon Jones when I was really heavily getting into the NFL. I think my dad was telling me about him and how like he invented the sack and stuff like that. And then I went on to watch all these NFL films when I was younger. I must have been like 9 or something. So when I heard his name, Deacon, it just sounded scary. And then I watched the highlights of this guy just tearing people's heads off. And it's always stuck with me about this guy. And then you go and you read, and I remember Pro Football Reference wouldn't have the actual stats. So you would have to figure out, people would have like, this is how many sacks he had in the year, whatever, like in the 60s. And now they actually have the numbers for the amount of sacks. So he was a 5-time sack leader. He coined the term a sack. Like he made that up. That's him. Okay? He had 3 21 sack seasons. Let me say that again. He had 3 seasons in which he sacked the opposing quarterback 21 times. He had a season, I think, with 22, if I'm not mistaken. This was in less games than they play nowadays. 8-time Pro Bowler, 5-time All-Pro. So if you think Aaron Donald was dominant, Deacon Jones was a glitch. He had 21 sacks 3 times, which is outrageous. He kind of like created the edge rusher position in terms of what it became. I think there was players that played it before, but in terms of what he was able to do with it from a pass rushing sense, he really changed the game. So that's why he's number 1 for me. Number 2, Aaron Donald. Okay. Aaron Donald, the most dominant modern defender. I would say J.J. Watt is close, but Aaron Donald, more consistent, more longevity. 3-time Defensive Player of the Year, Defensive Rookie of the Year as well in his career. 8-time Pro Bowler, a 10-plus sack season man. 1 absolutely crazy 20.5 sack season in 2018, in which the Rams also went to the Super Bowl and lost to the Patriots. 1 Super Bowl ring with the Matthew Stafford-led Rams in 2021, and those 2 Super Bowl appearances. Aaron Donald took over games with lightning quickness, unbelievable power for a man of his size, which, remember, Aaron Donald, a little bit undersized, shorter than most defensive tackles, but unbelievable hands, unbelievable point of attack quickness, unbelievable slipperiness, and then also that power in the run game to hold up at that size makes him one of the greatest defensive players in the top 5, in my opinion, of all time. Merlin Olsen is next up. If it were not for Aaron Donald, he would be the greatest defensive tackle in Rams history and was before. He did have 14 seasons in which he was named to the Pro Bowl, 5 All-Pro seasons. He got MVP votes twice, and he was an All-60s and All-70s all-decade team player, which speaks to his longevity and his consistency. Excellent all-around defensive tackle. Then we have Marshall Faulk at number 4, which it's a little bit of a debate between Faulk and Dickerson at the running back position. Notice how this entire list is pass rushers and running backs. That's the Los Angeles Rams. That's the St. Louis Rams for you. But Marshall Faulk did more in terms of winning. I think he meant more to the franchise's history than Eric Dickerson personally, as he did play a little bit longer for the team as well. But Faulk had 3 All-Pro seasons, 4 Pro Bowls. He was a Super Bowl champ in 1999. He made 2 Super Bowls with the team, 2001, where they lost to the Patriots again, and 1999, where they beat the Titans. And then he led the NFL in yards per attempt 3 years in a row, 99, 2000, and 2001. Okay, touchdown in 2000. He led the NFL. 1,000 and a 1,000 season. 1,000 receiving, 1,000 rushing, which is out of this world skill set in 1999. And he was top 2 in MVP voting from 1999 through 2001. I think that there is an argument that Marshall Faulk was the best football player in the NFL from 1999 through 2001. He could do everything. Catch the football, run the football. And in that Mike Martz offense, that greatest show on turf, he was the engine of the offense. You had to stop Marshall Faulk, and if you did not, you were in for a long day. At number 5, Eric Dickerson. Eric Dickerson is probably the most graceful runner ever to hit a football field. And the beginning of his career doesn't even sound accurate. Like, the numbers are insane. So 3 1,800-yard seasons in his first 4 years. Do you realize what I just said? 3 1,800-yard seasons. I don't know how many there are in NFL history, but Eric Dickerson has 3 of them in his first 4 years. And then he has a record-breaking 1984 season in which he rushes for still the most rushing yards in a season with 2,105 yards. He's second in MVP 2 times and the Offensive Rookie of the Year in 83. And he could have won the MVP in 84 if it were not for Dan Marino having the greatest quarterback season of all time, arguably still, but to that point for sure. So, yeah, Dickerson was robbed of an MVP. But 1984 was a special season in the NFL. And then number 6, my honorable mention, is Jack Youngblood, which is a heck of an honorable mention. I mean, the Rams have great players here. Jack Youngblood, 5-time All-Pro, 2-time sack leader in 74 and 79, a 14-plus sack season 4 different times, and he played in 17 playoff games for the Rams franchise. He played forever, and he's still involved in the NFL, I believe. That is my Rams list. Next up, we've got the Miami Dolphins. Miami Dolphins. Miami Dolphins will refuse to let you know that they did not go, and they did go to the Super Bowl and go undefeated in 1972. They'll pop the bottles every single year until you have it ingrained in your memory. They did that in 1972. No one's done it since, and it's annoying, but it is what it is. From a salty Patriots fan. Okay, I know I messed the song up, but we'll go from there. At number 1, Danny Marino, which is the funniest thing about it is that guy didn't even play on the team. But Dan Marino is the greatest Dolphin of all time, and there's no debate. Yeah, there's no debate. Dan Marino is arguably the best passer of the football in NFL history. The precision, accuracy, arm strength, and quickness of release is out of this planet. Okay, 5-time yards leader, 3-time touchdown leader, the 1984 MVP season, in which I already mentioned was one of the greatest of all time, and I made a video on it a few years ago. It is, to me, the greatest, most impressive season in NFL history from a quarterback, given the era and the competition at the time. 1984 Super Bowl appearance in which they got absolutely annihilated by the all-time great 49er team. Dan Marino, though, for all of the lack of Super Bowl ring thing, won 147 games in his career. And the most impressive thing about Dan Marino to me is that release and then also the ability to have no sacks against. Like, the lowest sack percentage over a career in NFL history, 3.1%. He was not a mobile quarterback, but due to the fact of how quickly he deciphered where he needed to go with the ball and how quickly he got rid of the ball, he was able to always not take sacks, which is huge in terms of not allowing negatives for your team. Larry Little is my number 2, the all-time great right guard, one of the greatest right guards in NFL history, if not the greatest. 5-time first-team All-Pro, 2 Super Bowls, and he was a member of the 1972 Dolphins. At number 3, Larry Zonka. This is a little bit of a influence icon pick. I don't think he's the 3rd greatest player, but when you mix everything together and what he meant for the franchise, I certainly think he's 3rd. So he made 5 straight Pro Bowls. Like, this was a very good player, and he had 2 All-Pro seasons. And for a running back, that is very good. You also factor in that he led the NFL in yards per attempt in 1971, and he had all 3 seasons in which Miami went to the Super Bowl, which was 1971, 1972, 1973. In those 3 seasons in a row where they made the Super Bowl, he had 1,000 yards in all 3 of those years. And then in the 73 playoffs, the year after they went undefeated and won the Super Bowl again, he had 333 yards and 6 touchdowns in just the 1973 playoffs. He was the engine of the team. So Larry Csonka was the identity of the 72 Dolphins, the 73 Dolphins, the back-to-back championship teams, the toughness, the grit in which he ran, the size. He was a tough tackle. So Larry Csonka is number 3. At number 4, Dwight Stevenson, a great center who blocked for Dan Marino, 4-time first-team All-Pro center, and an All-80s team member. At number 5, Jason Taylor, in which I still have vivid nightmares of Jason Taylor in 2006 against the Patriots. The Patriots did not score a single point against Jason Taylor's Dolphins. In 2006, Jason Taylor was the best defensive player in the NFL, Defensive Player of the Year, with 9 forced fumbles. 9 forced fumbles. 2 interceptions, 2 touchdowns, 13.5 sacks. He also led the NFL in sacks in 2002 with 18.5, and he had 6 10-plus sack seasons and 3 All-Pros. Jason Taylor was very good. I think he's a player of the 2000s that not enough younger people would know about, that they desperately need to know about. He was really, really good. Bob Griese at number 6, my honorable mention. Bob Griese is another one of those guys that, doing research for these lists, actually blew me away with how much he accomplished in his career, because, most of what I knew about him was he was a system quarterback. He handed the ball off a lot. They were a defensive team. They ran the football. He had Don Shula, all this stuff. Great offensive line. Bob Griese, he didn't do much, right? He wasn't even really involved in one of the Super Bowls, which is absolutely true. So, yeah, he wasn't like a stud, like one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time. But when you dive into what he accomplished, he was a 2-time champion. He had 8 Pro Bowls to his name, 2 All-Pros to his name. He was second in MVP voting in 1977. He led the NFL in completions, rating, game-winning drives, and touchdowns once in his career. So he wasn't just a bum, a slouch, a system quarterback. He actually was a productive quarterback that might have been not an all-timer, but a darn productive one for his era. So my honorable mention, Bob Griese. They wouldn't have been able to get at least one Super Bowl without him. The Minnesota Vikings are up next. The Vikings' best player in their history is Alan Page. Why is Alan Page the greatest player that ever played for the Vikings? Well, he is only one of 2 defensive players to win an NFL MVP award. And the other one goes of 2 initials. I'll let you guess that. Okay? Alan Page was the 1971 MVP and Defensive Player of the Year. He was a 5-time All-Pro. He had 18 sacks in the year 1976 as a defensive tackle, and he was a second-team All-Pro in that season. So he probably should have had more All-Pro seasons. But Alan Page, not only did he win the MVP, but he was a part of a Vikings franchise that I believe went to 4 Super Bowls in that 70s era. And that defensive line was the biggest reason why. Like, they were an unbelievable defensive line, purple people eaters, and Alan Page was the center of it all. So at number 1, Alan Page, I think he's a top 10 defensive player in NFL history. At number 2, the freak, Randy Moss. Randy Moss don't stretch on game day, and Randy Moss don't need a stretch on this list, right? Randy Moss, the only reason he might not be number 1 is because he didn't play long enough to really be number 1. But if you watched Randy Moss, I don't really need to describe how great of a player he was. But once he hit the NFL, he changed the NFL. He changed the way defenses would play. Cover 2 became the main system and the main go-to option of coverage for the NFL because of Randy Moss. Because no longer could teams simply one-on-one cover wide receivers. They had to have a safety over top of Randy Moss, or else you were cooked. You were breakfast. Okay, Randy Moss led the NFL in touchdowns 3 times with the Vikings. He had 2 100-catch seasons. He won the Rookie of the Year in 1998, in which he led the NFL in touchdowns with 17 as a rookie. And he catapulted the Vikings to one of the greatest offenses in NFL history. I think at that point might have been the greatest offense in NFL history, the 1998 Vikings, in terms of points scored. And Randy Moss was the biggest influence on that because of how quickly he could score, because defenses didn't have any answers for him at that time. And he was third in MVP voting in 1998 as a rookie receiver, which is insane. He... The lowest yards per reception he had in his first 3 seasons, 1998, 1999, 2000, was 17.7 yards per reception. So that's how explosive he was. One-hand catch machine, the best deep threat in NFL history. Randy Moss is number 2. At number 3, I've got AP all day, Adrian Peterson, the greatest modern running back. In terms of modern, I'm going to say from about, like the last 15 years. I think Adrian Peterson is easily the name that would come up first on 99% of people's lists in the greatest running back of all time, right? So Adrian Peterson, just like when you look at him, he just was built out of a lab to play running back. He's just shredded, big, fast. Like, people do not understand how explosive Adrian Peterson would hit the hole. You wouldn't see him, and then all of a sudden he'd be 50 yards down the field and you'd be like, what just happened? And then there's other moments he would stiff arm you. He, to me, like, if Jim Brown played in 2008, that's what he would look like. Like the closest thing to Jim Brown is Adrian Peterson, in my opinion. 3-time rushing yard leader, 2-time touchdown leader, offensive rookie of the year in 2007, I believe, MVP in 2012 with 2,097 yards in the year 2012. I remember being on a cruise and watching 2012 Adrian Peterson single-handedly carry a terrible football team to the playoffs, in which I think they had Christian Ponder at quarterback. This guy was running against the Packers, and he was running through everybody. It was unbelievable. I've never seen a running back like that in one season, just a man possessed. He had 1,760 yards in his second season in 2008, which might have also been his peak, because remember, 2012 was after a torn ACL, but man, he was the best running back in the league for a number of seasons. Whenever he was healthy, he was the best. And then a 4-time All-Pro in his career. Adrian Peterson, unbelievable player. At number 4, Chris Carter. All he does is catch touchdowns. He led the NFL in touchdowns 3 times. He was an 8-time Pro Bowler, 2-time All-Pro, 8 1,000-yard seasons in a row, and an all-time Viking in terms of records. Receptions, touchdowns, receiving yards. He holds those records still. He played forever for the Vikings, and he didn't even start his career with the Vikings. And honestly, like, his first 3 years with the Vikings were kind of average, but then all of a sudden, once it came to the 90s, he just exploded. And like I said, had 8 Pro Bowl seasons, 8 1,000-yard seasons in a row, and became the number 1 red zone threat in the NFL for a number of seasons. So Carter was the best player on the Vikings, or the best offensive player on the Vikings for a number of years. And then once Randy Moss got there, that offense just took off to a different level. Number 5, Fran Tarkington, one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time to not win a Super Bowl, was an MVP and Offensive Player of the Year in 1975, led the league in touchdowns that season. He actually had 2 stints with the Vikings where he took a break from the Vikings, went to the Giants, and went back to the Vikings later in his career. 3 Super Bowl appearances, led the league in attempts, completions, completion percentage, yards, touchdowns, and comebacks. Comebacks, he actually led the NFL 3 times, the others once. So Fran Tarkington, statistically, all-timer, great scrambler, kind of known for that ability to run around in circles and find a man open and be kind of like Russell Wilson-like for the modern age people there. But Fran Tarkington was the great quarterback and the greatest quarterback for the Vikings, the great quarterback of that 70s era. And, one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time, up there for sure. And then John Randall is my honorable mention. John Randall in the 90s was one of the best defensive tackles of the decade, maybe the best defensive tackle of the decade. 9-10 sack seasons in his career with the Vikings. 93 to 98, he had 6 All-Pro appearances in a row. 93 to 98, so the core of the 90s. And then he led the league in sacks in 1997. Absolute dog. He would just get after people. He would bark up the tree and he would back it up. And yeah, quick, like undersized guy, but perfect fit for that Vikings defense of that time. They played in the dome on the fast turf, and he was just an assassin out there getting after quarterbacks. So that's my Vikings list. The New England Patriots are next up. Man, the Patriots list was hard as a fan of the team. But honestly, the first 4 names were pretty easy. Like, obviously, Tom Brady is number 1. He's the greatest football player in NFL history. The 6-time champion with New England. 3 MVPs. A couple crazy stats for him. He did not lose a playoff game until his 4th playoff appearance. Meaning, he had already won 3 Super Bowls before he lost a playoff game. He started his first playoff game in 2001, and he didn't lose until 2005, in which he still won a playoff game in 2005. He was also, many people remember like the 6 championships. Many people remember all the records that he holds. Like he holds every record known to man at quarterback. But he also did figurehead the undefeated 16-0 regular season, which has also never been achieved by anybody else. So although they didn't win the Super Bowl, maybe one of the more underrated achievements of Tom Brady's career is that they did go 16-0 in a regular season in which he threw 50 touchdowns and had arguably the greatest passing season in NFL history. So yeah, Tom Brady, number 1. Rob Gronkowski, number 2, and an easy choice for me. In my opinion, the greatest tight end in NFL history. He had the most touchdown catches in one season for a tight end the year 2011. 15 postseason touchdowns in 22 games. He has the most Patriot receiving touchdowns of any man with 79. The highest touchdowns per game, 0.69. 0.69, which is just hilarious because it's Gronk, right? 0.69, if I have to make that more clear, in history. Okay, so highest touchdowns per game. One of the greatest blocking tight ends of all time. One of the most athletic after the catch tight ends, probably the best of all time. The only thing that plagued him was injuries, but Gronk was a personality. Gronk brought life to the second era of the Patriots dynasty. He brought something different. He brought the larger-than-life character to the team that it needed, and he ignited another 3 championships. Because when you think about Gronk's career, I think the biggest compliment I can pay to Gronk is there was only 1 year where they were able to win the Super Bowl when he did not play, which was 2016, and that team was arguably the most well-rounded team that Tom Brady ever had. Right? They had the number 1 scoring defense in the league, and they were probably the second best offense in the league, and only because the 2016 Falcons were all-time great. But the other seasons, it felt like whenever Gronk would play, they would win the Super Bowl. Like 2011, he gets hurt, near the end of the year in the playoffs. He got hurt going into the Super Bowl, which made him play on a broken ankle. If he doesn't have a broken ankle, they probably win the Super Bowl against the Giants, right? 2012, he breaks his forearm against the Colts, blocking for a field goal or blocking for an extra point. I can't quite remember. I think it was an extra point. And he broke his forearm, which caused him to miss the game against the Ravens, which was a huge factor. Okay. 2013, he tears his ACL against the Browns, which maybe they don't beat the Broncos, but they did beat the Broncos in the regular season in New England when Gronk played. In 2015, he plays, they lose, they had other injuries, things like that. But the point is, basically when Gronk played, they went to the Super Bowl, or they won the Super Bowl. And that was basically the difference. When Brady and Gronk were playing, they went to the Super Bowl. That was basically it for about 10 years. And every time he didn't, they didn't. At number 3, John Hannah, 7-time first-team All-Pro. In many people's opinion, the greatest guard ever to play in the NFL. His last game in the NFL was the loss in the Super Bowl in 1985 to the Chicago Bears. And he was actually once voted 7th in Offensive Player of the Year in 1979, which is insane for a guard to get Offensive Player of the Year votes. But that was the case for John Hannah. He was that good. So John Hannah, the greatest guard of all time, arguably Tom Brady and the Patriots. You know, the Patriots have the greatest quarterback in Tom Brady, the greatest tight end in Rob Gronkowski, and the greatest guard in John Hannah. That is debatable, but it could be true. At number 4, Andre Tippett, who isn't the greatest pass rusher of all time, but the greatest in Patriots history. 100 sacks, which is still the record for the Patriots. 2-time All-Pro, an all-time sack artist with 18.5 sacks and 16.5 sacks in back-to-back seasons in 1984 and 85. He was their best player at that time on the 1985 Patriots, in which they got to the Super Bowl. They lost to the Bears. They got annihilated. That was an all-time great Bears team. But when you think about the Patriots, you have to have a well-rounded, overall thought process. And Hannah, Tippett, they were instrumental into other aspects of the Patriots teams that weren't just the dynasty teams. And then at number 5, I have Ty Law, who has always been one of my favorite players in history, but definitely for the Patriots. 3 Super Bowl championships, 4 appearances. He also appeared on the 1996 team that people forget made the Super Bowl against the Packers. So he went to 4 Super Bowls. He actually didn't play in the 2004 game, but we'll let that pass. 2-time interception leader with the Patriots. 2003, he was probably the best corner in the NFL. He led the NFL in passes defense with 23 in the year 2003. And he also had 3 interceptions in a single playoff game against, at that time, the MVP Peyton Manning in the 2003 divisional round, in which Ty Law put on a clinic of playing cornerback. Okay, the one where he catches one-handed is just a visual. Okay, it's unbelievable. And he also had the pick 6 in Super Bowl 36, which was obviously massive. I believe it was the first touchdown of the game in which the Patriots scored, and it allowed them to win that Super Bowl. So extremely clutch player, amazing player, and for a period, I think Ty Law and Champ Bailey were the best corners in the league, and I think they were kind of going back and forth. Ty Law was the best in 03, arguably one of the best in 01, around that time, 04 around that time. And he even does great later in his career when he leaves New England. But yeah, Ty Law, number 5. And then at number 6, Matthew Slater. I put Slater at 6. This was really hard because there's so many players on New England that are unsung players. Like Julian Edelman or Teddy Bruschi or Mike Vrabel, Willie McGinnis, Rodney Harrison, Devin McCourty, who has numerous... I didn't believe he had that many records for the Patriots. He actually does. I think he leads the team in tackles all time. I didn't know that. You guys know that? And then, there's so many players that you could go through the list of great, great Patriots that were influential to the dynasty. But if we're talking about, okay, best player at their position, just as I did with Justin Tucker, is Matthew Slater the best special teams gunner in NFL history? And there is definitely a debate for that. And because of what he meant to the team, to the leadership, to what it meant to be a Patriot, to do your job, Matthew Slater is my honorable mention. With 10 Pro Bowls to his name, a 2-time All-Pro, 3 Super Bowl championships, and in 2011, he had 24 tackles. So Matthew Slater is my honorable mention, and that's my Patriots list. The New Orleans Saints are next up. Number 1 is obviously Drew Brees, one of the best statistical quarterbacks of all time. And if it were not for Tom Brady and Peyton Manning, Drew Brees would probably be looked at a lot greater. And I also hate that he does not have an MVP, because 2009, let me make this clear, Drew Brees was the most valuable player in the 2009 NFL season. So let me just make that clear. I do not care what Peyton fans will say, okay? Drew Brees, 4-time touchdown leader, 7-time passing yards leader, the 2009 Super Bowl winner, and I think he was the MVP, and the second in MVP voting. He got robbed, okay? He got robbed a number of times. Maybe not a number of times, at least once, but he was in the conversation 4 times. He was second in MVP voting 4 times, which means he was in the convo pretty heavily. So Drew Brees was a great quarterback, but his problem was that others were just a little bit better. That's his biggest problem. So Drew Brees, great passer, one of the most accurate players of all time. Willie Roaf is my number 2 Saint of all time. He was a Pro Bowler in every season in the New Orleans Saints uniform, except for his first and his last. He was a 2-time first-team All-Pro and a 3-time second-team All-Pro, and he was also named to the All-90s team. One of the best tackles, not only in Saints history, but of the 90s, and then I believe he went on to play with the Chiefs. But really great player. Ricky Jackson is number 3, the greatest defensive player for the Saints, a 6-time Pro Bowler, 5-time second-team All-Pro. Ricky Jackson had 136 sacks for the New Orleans Saints. Jari Evans, a forgotten name for the Saints that was highly impactful to their Super Bowl win and also the era of Drew Brees' passing prowess. 4-time first-team All-Pro from 2009, the Super Bowl championship team, through 2012, in which Drew Brees reset record after record because of the interior protection from Jari Evans in part. Played in 10 playoff games, and he was a member of the All-2010s team as a starting guard. Cameron Jordan makes my list at number 5. 13 sacks and 11 passes defense in the year 2017, where he was 4th in Defensive Player of the Year voting. That was, to me, his best year of his career, but he was just very, very steady, right? He had 6 10-plus sack seasons with 117 and a half. He's still playing, and he's an 8-time Pro Bowler, just a highly regarded all-around football player, and really captained a number of the best Saints defenses that I've seen. And at number 6, Pat Swilling. I put him here because he was the Defensive Player of the Year in 1991. He was a back-to-back All-Pro in, I believe, 91 and 92, and then a Pro Bowler from 89 through 93. And in that period of his career, he was one of the best pass rushers in the NFL. He is also the top sacker in Saints history, if I'm not mistaken. So I have him at number 6. Next up, the New York G-Men. The Giants at number 1, LT. And if you do not know who I'm talking about, I did not put his full name. The only person I did not put his full name on any graphic in any of these 2 videos. Because if you don't know who LT is, you need to do a history check on the NFL, okay? But Lawrence Taylor is the greatest defensive player in NFL history. An 8-time first-team All-Pro, a 1986 most valuable player with 20 and a half sacks. In that season, Lawrence Taylor had one of the greatest seasons of any individual in NFL history. He won the MVP as a pass rusher. He had 20 and a half sacks. He won the Super Bowl. He also was a 3-time Defensive Player of the Year, a Defensive Rookie of the Year, and there are stories about Lawrence Taylor that don't even make sense. Sometimes he would be, on something, going to the game. Maybe he had too much to drink. the night before. They wanted him to play tight end one year. He probably could have. He could drop back into coverage. He could stuff the run. He could break a guy's leg. He could do a lot of different things. But the biggest thing of all is that he changed protections in the NFL. He changed the way people chip, double team, block, running backs get involved in the passing game because of the outside linebacker 3-4 position in which Bill Belichick and Lawrence Taylor took over the NFL. At number 2, Michael Strahan, who, if not for Lawrence Taylor, would be the greatest pass rusher in Giants history. Defensive Player of the Year, 22.5 sacks in one season, which was a record for a very long time. 6 forced fumbles in 2001, that same season. A Super Bowl champion in 2007, in which he did sack Tom Brady in that game, unfortunately. 4.5 sacks on the 2000 playoff run, in which a lot of people forget that the Giants made the playoffs that year, and they went to the Super Bowl that year, right? Like, the 2000 Giants team is completely forgotten. Nobody even remembers them. Kerry Collins, Michael Strahan, etc., Tiki Barber. But 4.5 sacks in that playoff run. He was a 2-time sack leader, a 4-time All-Pro, and now he's heavily involved in media, Fox Sports, all of it. But Strahan, gap tooth, big character for the New York Giants, represented an era and was one of the best pass rushers of that era. At number 3, Emlyn Tunnell, who's one of the greatest safeties in NFL history. 4-time All-Pro. 74 interceptions with the New York Giants. I'll say that again. 74 interceptions. Okay? At least 6 interceptions in every single NFL season from 1948 to 1957. That is insane. Most great safeties don't even get 6 interceptions in 1 year, let alone every season from 1948 to 1957, which is like 9 years. Eli Manning is my number 4. Eli Manning might be looked at as overrated or Super Bowls and rings and that's it. But hey, take it from a Patriots fan. Eli Manning deserves a spot on this list as being tough and clutch as hell. A lot of people forget that Eli had his own starting streak. Brett Favre had the Iron Man streak, but Eli had that as well. He never came off the field. 2011 was his peak. 4,900 yards, 6 game-winning drives in one season. And then in the playoffs, he had 1,219 yards, 9 touchdowns to only 1 pick in that same season, in which they went on to win the Super Bowl, and Eli Manning was the Super Bowl MVP. 2 Super Bowl rings, 4 Pro Bowls, led the NFL in interceptions 3 different times. So there will be people that say, hey, wasn't good enough, wasn't consistent enough. But he was responsible in large part for winning the Giants 2 Super Bowls. And he was also a darn good quarterback for a majority of his career. He wasn't elite, but he was good. And he won 2 rings. And he was clutch. So Eli Manning is number 4. At number 5, Frank Gifford, one of the big names and the big faces of the 50s Giants teams, led by Lombardi and Tom Landry, that great coaching staff that they had. But he was a running back for the Giants. He was the MVP of the NFL in 1956. Yards from scrimmage leader in 1956. And a 4-time All-Pro. He was one of the best running backs of that generation and one of the best players on one of the best teams of that era as well. Rosie Brown makes my honorable mention as a tackle of the Giants, a 6-time All-Pro, a champion in the year 1956 in which he blocked for Frank Gifford, and he was a part of that Lombardi Giants offense in which he blocked for Gifford, and he was, of course, getting out and running and blocking on the sweep because you got an alley here, and you got to hit it right there. And, Rosie Brown was responsible for that. So that's my Giants list. The New York Jets are next up. The Jets, Jets. At number 1, I've got Darrelle Revis. And basically, I broke it down into this in my mind, right? Darrelle Revis, the reason he's number 1 is if I'm talking about and I'm asking somebody, okay, we're making an all-time NFL team. I've got to go face aliens. And I've got to bring an NFL team to this game. Space Jam, Space Gridiron, right? And I've got to pick 3 corners in NFL history. One of the names you might bring up is Darrelle Revis, especially in the year 2009. None of these other players, including Joe Namath, would even be discussed. That is why Darrelle Revis is number 1 on my list. I hope that's good enough explanation. But let's just put 2009 into perspective. This is the greatest cornerback season I have ever seen. And it's not even close. Okay? He shut everybody down. Everybody. I'm talking about Chad Johnson, Randy Moss, Terrell Owens. I'm talking about Steve Smith. I just go down the list of Andre Johnson, Calvin Johnson. Go down the list of guys like that were in that era of great receivers. He shut down everybody. And not only that, I don't know how he didn't win Defensive Player of the Year. He had 6 interceptions that year in which nobody threw him the ball. Like, so every time he would get the ball, he was picking it off, and he had 31 passes defense. I have never seen a number that high, ever. 31 passes defense in one season. 31. How did he not win MVP? Or Defensive Player of the Year? And this team went on to the AFC Championship. Darrelle Revis was so good that the Jets made the AFC Championship 2 years in a row because of Darrelle Revis. That's how good he was at corner. Okay, 3-time All-Pro. And he actually returned to the Jets later after winning a Super Bowl with the Patriots in 2014. He returned to the team in 2015, and he actually had a great season. He had 4 picks and 5 fumble recoveries. And a lot of people will forget that was a good defense. I believe Todd Bowles coached that team. But, yeah. Joe Namath, number 2. Joe Namath is better than given credit for. A lot of younger fans will say his stats, they'll look at his touchdown-interception ratio, they'll say he was no good. But Joe Namath was the first quarterback in NFL history to throw for 4,000 yards in a season. Okay? He obviously led the Jets to that historic comeback against the Indianapolis Colts in the Super Bowl. He was actually a 3-time NFL yards leader, a 1-time touchdown leader, the AFL Rookie of the Year, and an AFL Player of the Year in 1968, same season that they won the Super Bowl. So Joe Namath was just better than people think. Like, he was a prolific passer for his era. Yeah, he threw a lot of interceptions because of when he played. Like, they threw a lot of interceptions, okay? Don Maynard is up next, the number 1 target for Joe Namath in his era. Okay, he was a 1-time yards leader, a 1-time yards per catch leader, a 1-time touchdown leader, 2 touchdowns in the 1968 playoff run, and he had 5 1,000-yard seasons. Deep threat, extraordinaire. Curtis Martin. Curtis Martin was a dog, tough. Started his career with New England, where he was a good player, actually Rookie of the Year in a season. And then he went on to the Jets and had 7 straight 1,000-yard seasons, proving his longevity as a running back, leading the NFL in rushing in 2004 in his 30s. He had an all-pro season in 2004 when he led the NFL in rushing. He had good power. He had good vision. He had good grittiness. Wasn't the most athletically gifted, but just always found that right hole. Always made that man miss when he needed to. He's at number 4. Larry Grantham is up next. At number 5, he had 5 all-pro seasons to start his career, 2 seasons with 5 picks, 1 season with 8.5 sacks, and a 68 Super Bowl champion. So this was a linebacker that was the figurehead of that Jets defense that took on Johnny Unitas, that was able to have a season with 5 picks, was able to have a season with 8.5 sacks. This is a linebacker. and had 5 All-Pros to start his career. So, all-around great player, underrated Jet of all time. Mark Gastineau is my honorable mention. A lot of people don't like or didn't like his personality and didn't like Mark, but when you look at what he achieved in his NFL career, there's no question he was a gifted pass rusher. 3-time All-Pro. He had 19 plus sacks 3 times in his career, which included a 22 sack season in 1984 and 2 20-sack seasons. He had a 4-year stretch with Defensive Player of the Year votes. So in a 4-year stretch, he was going for the sack record, pretty much. That's what he was doing. And he was getting Defensive Player of the Year type accolades. And he had great celebrations, by the way. So Mark Gastineau is my honorable mention. The Philadelphia Eagles. The Minister of Defense is the number 1 for the Eagles, Reggie White. In my opinion, the second greatest defensive player in NFL history. A 7-time All-Pro with the Eagles, Defensive Player of the Year in 1987, 21 sacks in 12 games is insane. Okay? He also had seasons of 18 sacks, 21 sacks, 21 sacks. Reggie White. I've heard stories from Phil Simms about Reggie White, about how dominant he was, how scary he was, but he was basically unblockable. He was massive. He could throw you with one arm right out of the way. He could intercept passes. He could stuff the run. He could do it all, Reggie White. He could spin move you. How do you stop a guy that can one-handed throw you and then also spin move? I don't know. That's why he's one of the best of all time. Brian Dawkins, I got the football behind me. Brian Dawkins, the Wolverine, brought the mentality, brought the feistiness, brought the energy, brought the bravado, brought the showmanship, brought it all to the Philadelphia Eagles secondary and defense. The Wolverine was a 4-time first-team All-Pro. He had 4 interceptions and 6 forced fumbles in 1999 with 24 passes defense in that same season. An all-around secondary playmaker. He could hit you and knock the ball out. He could intercept passes. He could knock it down. And he could inspire his teammates. He took it to a different level. And in 2005, he did the same thing. He had the same stats, 4 interceptions, 6 forced fumbles, 24 pass defense. He was a 4-time All-Pro. He helped the Eagles get to the 2004 Super Bowl against New England. He was a great player. At number 3, I got Jason Kelce. Because I think he's become a very admirable Philadelphia Eagle player. The leadership that he brought, the fact that he is in the debate for one of the greatest centers of all time, 6-time first-team All-Pro. 2017 and 2022, the Eagles had 2 of the best offensive lines in modern football. Just dominant, which aided them to get to the Super Bowl. I mean, they don't win the Super Bowl in 2017 with Nick Foles if they don't have one of the greatest offensive lines of all time. And Jason Kelce was at the center of that, literally. So he's number 3. And then you talk about the dog masks, you talk about the energy, you talk about all that stuff. 4, Chuck Bednarik, who was a 6-time first-team All-Pro, 3-time second-team All-Pro. Bednarik is a historic Philadelphia Eagle. Steve Van Buren, running back way back in the day, 1940s, 48 and 49 champion with the Eagles, a 5-time All-Pro, a 4-time yards and touchdown leader in his day. Bill Belichick had him on his list of the All 100 All Anniversary team. So Bill Belichick thinks he deserves to be on the list. At number 6, Donovan McNabb is the honorable mention here because of what he contributed to the constant success in the late 90s and early 2000s for the Eagles. And in my opinion, he was a top 5 quarterback of the 2000s. He was at least in the combo, right? If you have Tom Brady, if you have Peyton Manning, if you have Drew Brees, maybe Drew Brees, right? Maybe. Like, I think McNabb was better than Ben during that time. I think McNabb was better than McNair. I think McNabb was better than, I don't know, like, who comes to mind there? Phillip Rivers was only there for like half the era. So, like, to me, McNabb was always right there. And he was a 6-time Pro Bowler. He had a 90-45 record as a starter of the Eagles in that era, and was 9-7 in the playoffs. He had many seasons where he went deep in the playoffs. He went to NFC championships, I think 3 or 4 times. He went to the Super Bowl in 2004. He was second in MVP voting in 2000. He was probably statistically the second best quarterback in 2004, in which they went to the Super Bowl, the year that he had Terrell Owens. And he never had good receivers other than T.O. So McNabb was a really good quarterback. Often forgot about, but McNabb was good. Very athletic too. The Pittsburgh Steelers, which was probably the most difficult list on this entire thing. I mean, there's not only like 20 Hall of Famers, but there's like 10 defensive players that could have made my top 6. Defensive players. I only have one offensive player on my list. I don't even have Terry Bradshaw or Ben Roethlisberger on my top 6. I don't even know how I did that. I don't know if that's legal. But these players are so good that I couldn't leave any of them off. First, you've got Mean Joe Green, who was an easy number 1. He is the Steelers to me. When I think of the Steelers, I think of Joe Green. I think of Mean Joe Green. I think of the Steelers, the Steel Curtain, the great defense, the great pass rush, the just absolutely dominant Mean Joe Green, which was Defensive Rookie of the Year, 2-time Defensive Player of the Year, 4-time First Team All-Pro. He had 4 sacks in the 1978 playoffs, and he had the greatest Coke commercial of all time. Mean Joe Green, beast in the run game, beast in the pass game, set the tone for the Steeler defense. Jack Lambert was the face of the Steeler defense. He's number 2. Defensive Rookie of the Year, Defensive Player of the Year in 1976. 8 fumble recoveries. Second in MVP voting in that season in 76, 8 fumble recoveries, and second in MVP voting. He was nearly the MVP. And in 1976, in my opinion, that was the greatest Steelers defense of all time. They didn't win the Super Bowl that year, but they were unbelievable that year. 5-time top 7 Defensive Player of the Year voting, and a 6-time All-Pro. So he finished top 7 5 times in Defensive Player of the Year. So Lambert was just like an assassin. He thought the game at a very high level. He was so insightful, but he also like looked so different from that. It's kind of funny. Like Lambert was kind of like super intimidating looking, but he was like the smartest linebacker in the game. It's a very kind of like weird dynamic. Then you had Jack Ham, and the crazy thing about Jack Ham, Jack Lambert, who are both Jacks, and Mean Joe Green, is they all could have won Defensive Player of the Years at any given moment. Like Jack Ham is arguably the greatest coverage linebacker in NFL history. In 1972, his second season in the NFL, he had 7 interceptions at linebacker. He wasn't an All-Pro with 7 interceptions. But anyways, 6-time First Team All-Pro. A 2-time top 4 Defensive Player of the Year candidate. In 1978, he was second in Defensive Player of the Year voting. And he had 4 rings with Mean Joe Green and Jack Lambert and the Steel Curtain. And he had 2 interceptions in the 1974 playoffs. Lambert was a great player, but Jack Ham was just as good, if not better. So at number 3, I got Jack Ham. At number 4, Mike Webster. A lot of people cite as maybe the best center of all time. 5-time First Team All-Pro, 4 Super Bowl rings, 220 games played for the Pittsburgh Steelers, and a 9-time Pro Bowler, opening up those holes for Franco Harris. Mel Blount is my number 5. Mel Blount makes every list. 75th anniversary, 100th anniversary, 70s all decade. It doesn't matter. He makes the list. Mel Blount changed the NFL with his physicality at the corner position. He was bigger. He was stronger than 99% of receivers, which made it illegal for him to hold after 5 yards, and for any corner for that matter, after Mel Blount made it known, because he was the 1975 Defensive Player of the Year. So they had Mean Joe Green, a 2-time Defensive Player of the Year, Jack Lambert, a Defensive Player of the Year, Mel Blount, a Defensive Player of the Year, and Jack Ham, who easily could have won a Defensive Player of the Year, all on the same defense. Mel Blount had 11 interceptions in 1975, which allowed him to win the Defensive Player of the Year. He had 4 seasons with 6+ picks, and he also had 4 rings in his career. Troy Polamalu is my honorable mention as the great defender of this latest era of great Steeler football, flying through the skies in the run game, in the pass game, made some of the darndest interceptions you've ever seen. Flying one-handed. He used to jump over the pile on 4th and 1 and grab the quarterback or the running back from getting the yard. 4-time All-Pro, 2010 Defensive Player of the Year. Arguably could have been the 2008 Defensive Player of the Year as well, in which he had 7 interceptions that year and allowed the Steelers to have one of the best defenses of the past 20 years in the 2008 Steelers. So Troy Polamalu, absurd player. So gifted in terms of how he saw the game. He was everywhere. Like, sometimes he was back in the secondary, sometimes he was a linebacker, sometimes he was like right next to the defensive end. He was everywhere. You didn't know where he was coming from. He was everywhere. Next, the San Francisco 49ers, which was another absolutely difficult list to talk about and to rank. At number 1, I went Jerry Rice, which was hard. I really considered Joe Montana here, but Jerry Rice is the greatest receiver of all time, in my opinion. His stats don't even make sense. 6-time yards leader, 6-time touchdown leader. He had 22 touchdowns in a 12-game season in 1987. He was an Offensive Player of the Year 2 times, and he was 4 times top 3 in MVP votes, which kind of makes you wonder, why did he never win the MVP award? Because he was clearly the best player in the NFL. And maybe the second greatest player in NFL history. Maybe. Joe Montana, number 2. The guy that most people think of when they think of the Niners. Joe Cool, right? 139 record with the Niners. Touchdown leader, 2 times, 5-time completion percentage leader, 4 Super Bowl rings, 4-0 in those games, absurd Super Bowl stats, great playoff performer, back-to-back MVPs in 1989 and 1990, where he was clearly like a legend by this point and the best quarterback in the NFL. 88 and 89 playoff runs are absurd numbers. He had 19 touchdowns and only 1 interception with 1,623 yards. Those are 2 separate playoff runs in which they won. He won 2 MVPs, I believe, and 2 Super Bowls. And he had 19 touchdowns and 1 pick. Joe Montana. At number 3, Ronnie Lott. 5-time first-team All-Pro, 1-time interception leader, 1-time tackle leader, 1-time defensive touchdown leader, and 4 Super Bowls. Let me say that again. Ronnie Lott might be the greatest safety of all time. First team All-Pro 5 times. Now, this is where it gets fun. He led the NFL in interceptions once. He led the NFL in tackles once. That never really happens. You don't really see a guy lead the NFL in interceptions and then lead the NFL in tackles. And then also, he led the NFL in touchdowns. So he was pretty good. He also played football games with a finger removed. So that's pretty interesting. And he was one of the toughest football players of all time, and he would knock your block off. He could play corner or safety too. At number 4, Steve Young. 2-time MVP, 3-time first-team All-Pro from 1992 to 1994. He was right there with Brett Favre, in my opinion, as the best quarterback in the NFL, and probably from 92 to 94, the best quarterback in the NFL. Then a 5-time completion percentage leader, 4-time touchdown leader, 6-time rating leader, and he had 43 rushing touchdowns in his career, which for a while was a record, I believe, until Cam Newton broke it. At number 5, Patrick Willis makes the list as a modern 49er player. 5-time All-Pro, 2-time tackle leader, Defensive Rookie of the Year in 2007. Kind of surprised he never won a Defensive Player of the Year. He was the best linebacker in the NFL. Right after Ray Lewis's peak, he passed the baton to Patrick Willis, and Willis immediately was a monster. I mean, he was big and fast and physical. Patrick Willis was a complete lab rat of a linebacker. At number 6, I put T.O., which might be controversial, but it is hard to leave T.O., as great as he is, off any team's list. And when you think about his pure achievements as a player, he belongs on this list. Terrell Owens, from 2000 to 2002, in 3 years, was a 3-time first-team All-Pro in all 3 seasons. He led the NFL 2 times as a 49er in touchdowns. He led the NFL in yards per game, 1 time, or 2 times as well, and 2 times touchdowns, and 5 1,000-yard seasons as a 49er. So yeah, he went on to play with the Eagles, he went on to play with the Cowboys, but his peak in his prime was arguably the 49ers. Some might say the Eagles, but he became one of the faces of the NFL. He is on what many people argue the greatest football game of all time, ESPN 2K5, with a 49ers jersey on. Like, T.O., around 2005, from 99 to 2007, it was him or Randy Moss or Marvin Harrison for the best receiver in the league. And T.O. had a couple of years there where he was probably the best receiver in the league. He was physical, he was fast, he was great after the catch, he could beat you deep, he could do everything. He was tough. He had a lot of a personality, but man, this guy could play football. So those are my 49ers. The Seattle Seahawks. I got Steve Largent at number 1. Pretty easy decision for me when you consider what he did in his career. He was the first man at wide receiver in the NFL to catch 100 touchdowns. When Steve Largent retired, he held all major NFL receiving records, including the most receptions in a career with 819, the most receiving yards in a career with 13,089, and the most touchdowns receptions with 100. Okay? He also had a then record streak of 177 career regular season consecutive games with a reception. So 177 consecutive games with a reception. Steve Largent, one of those players that doesn't make a lot of sense. Kind of a white guy, undersized, not the fastest, but man, baller. Absolute baller. And you would see him make catches where it's he's jumping in the air. I don't know how he's jumping that high, and he's catching it fearless and consistent, man. All-time Seahawk, best of all time. Walter Jones is my number 2. The man that engineered the Sean Alexander touchdown season, in my opinion, and those great Mike Holmgren teams of the early 2000s. 4-time first-team All-Pro. 4-time first-team All-Pro. 2-time second-team All-Pro. The 2005 Seahawks team that went to the Super Bowl. Sean Alexander broke those records. Walter Jones, all 2000s team, one of the best tackles, definitely in the top 2 or 3 since 2000, in my opinion. At number 3, Bobby Wagner, 6-time first-team All-Pro, 3-time combo tackle leader, 4-time 4th in Defensive Player of the Year in 2017, not four-time, fourth in Defensive Player of the Year in 2017, fifth in the MVP race in 2014, second in Defensive Player of the Year in 2012. So, yeah. Or second in Defensive Rookie of the Year in 2012. So, he was in the race for Defensive Rookie of the Year. He was in the race for MVP one year. He was in the race for Defensive Player of the Year. Never won any of those awards, but was a first-team All-Pro numerous times. And was maybe not the best at his absolute peak of the Legion of Boom, but the most consistent, had the best career of all of them, and stayed with the Seahawks the longest out of all of them. And for a time, was the best linebacker in the NFL for like a 3 to 5 year stretch. So he's at number 3. At number 4, Russell Wilson. Russell Wilson getting hated on a little bit too much as of late, but a 9-time Pro Bowler, a 1-time touchdown leader, a 1-time rating leader, top 4 in Offensive Player of the Year, 3 different times, 104 wins to only 53 losses as a Seahawk, 1 Super Bowl ring, and 2 appearances back-to-back. It's very hard for a quarterback to have 9 Pro Bowl nods on the same team. He won. He was clutch in a lot of games. Russell Wilson had absolute ice in his veins in a lot of big moments. And, I mean, he could scramble. At his peak, he was unstoppable. He would make throws where it's like, I don't even know how you defend that pass. Like, the throws he would run to the right and, like, throw a perfect dot to the sideline to Tyler Lockett, or, like, run around in a circle and loft the ball up to Doug Baldwin. Russell Wilson was a crazy player once upon a time. At number 5, Richard Sherman. Make sure to not try him with a sorry receiver like Crabtree. But Richard Sherman, unbelievable player. Kind of like re-diagnosed and recalibrated what you could be as a corner. Like his size at 6'3" made people change how they were drafting the position, how they thought about the position, all that stuff. And that's the biggest thing I could say about Sherman. He's a Hall of Famer. He's a Super Bowl champ. He is the most influential member of the Legion of Boom in terms of personality and character of that unit, in my opinion. He was an interception leader. He was a multi-time All-Pro. He was Richard Sherman. At number 6, Cortez Kennedy, who is a Hall of Fame defensive tackle, 3 straight first-team All-Pro seasons, and a Defensive Player of the Year in 1992 with 14 sacks. He also had 7 Pro Bowls and played his entire career with Seattle. So he is the honorable mention. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers. At number 1, Derek Brooks. This one also was fairly easy for me. Derek Brooks. If Jack Ham is not the best coverage linebacker of all time, it's probably Derek Brooks. And I think it might be Derek Brooks because the Tampa 2 is what the Bucs were known for. And Derek Brooks was different, bro. Different. 3-time solo tackle leader. Defensive Player of the Year in 2002. He was 4th in MVP voting in 2002. Four-time Defensive Player of the Year votes in the top 6. So he had top 6 votes 4 different times in his career. And he had 4 pick sixes in 2002, including 1 in the Super Bowl, I believe. 4 at linebacker. Pick sixes in 1 year. His range was insane. To tackle, to cover, to be what they needed him to be. He was a glitch. Derek Brooks would be unbelievable today. Like, that's how good he is, or was. Rondé Barber is my number 2 because of his longevity with the team. He had 10 interceptions in 2001, which was the most in the NFL. He was a 3-time first-team All-Pro, 2 interceptions in those 0-2 playoffs, where they won that Super Bowl against the Raiders. And Rondé Barber could play nickel corner or outside. And he could probably play safety too, although he wasn't asked to do that much. But corner outside, press coverage, corner inside, he could do it, man. He could blitz. He could do everything. Rondé Barber was a complete football player. At number 3, Warren Sapp. The only reason he's number 3 is he left to the Raiders after, the peak of his career in Tampa Bay. But Derrick Brooks was a Defensive Player of the Year in 2002. Warren Sapp was the Defensive Player of the Year in 1999. They played on the same defense. And he was 3rd in Defensive Player of the Year voting in 2000 as well, with 16 and a half sacks that season. He was a 7-time Pro Bowler, a 4-time All-Pro, and for many people, Warren Sapp is the name that a lot of people bring up when they think of that 4-3 defensive tackle. When they're looking for that penetrator, right? Like when people were talking about Jalen Carter coming out of the draft last year, or people compare, Aaron Donald to someone similar. Warren Sapp is the guy that people bring up, and he was that destructive at his peak as a pass rusher. Mike Evans is number 4, without a doubt a Hall of Famer coming up, but the best offensive player in Tampa history, 5,000 more yards than second place in Tampa history, 60 more touchdowns than anyone in Tampa history. He has 200 more catches than anyone in Tampa history, and he has 10 straight 1,000-yard seasons, which is a record. And the most yards per game in Tampa history as well. Mike Evans, from day one, was unreal. 1,000 yards as a rookie. He carried Johnny Manziel in college. Then he went on to become an absolute stud in the NFL. Never seems to get the recognition he deserves, though. Super Bowl champ, was key in that NFC Championship game to start that off. Absolute stud, man. Mike Evans. Great guy off the field, too. At number 5, Leroy Selman, who was the Defensive Player of the Year in 1979, the all-time sack leader for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and a Hall of Famer. Great player. At number 6, Lavonte David. That's my pick for an honorable mention. There might be some debate to that one, but Lavonte David, I think, will get into the Hall of Fame one day. He obviously won the Super Bowl in 2020. And I think his career does not have the accolades that it deserves. Because only 2013 was his only All-Pro season, despite being a top 4 linebacker for about, 10 years. I don't really understand how he doesn't have more accolades, but he had 5 picks and 7 sacks and 10 passes defense in 2013, which was his best season of his career statistically. He was also 3rd in tackles, 7th in sacks, and 1st in forced fumbles in Tampa history. So, yeah, 1st in forced fumbles is really impressive, but 3rd in tackles is also pretty darn impressive considering Derrick Brooks, all these other guys that we've discussed. But Lavonte David, the second coming of Derrick Brooks, but yeah, the leader of the defense of the past 10 years. That is my Tampa list. The Tennessee Titans and the Houston Oilers here. Bruce Matthews is number 1. Bruce Matthews, 7-time first-team All-Pro, played for Houston and Tennessee, which was largely impactful on why I made him number 1, because he played for both teams. He played for the Titans and the Texans, and he was an All-Pro for both teams. And he played Pro Bowl, I should say he played for the Houston Oilers, not the Houston Texans, and the Tennessee Titans. And he was a Pro Bowler every single season from 1988 to 2001. So, yeah, one of the best offensive linemen of all time. Very versatile as well. At number 2, Earl Campbell, who's one of my favorite running backs to go back and watch in NFL history because he ran a dude's face right into the turf, okay? A Hall of Famer. From 1978 to 1983, he's one of the best running back stretches of all time. He was an MVP, a 3-time Offensive Player of the Year, a 3-time yards leader, a 2-time touchdown leader. He finished top 2 in MVP votes 3 years in a row. His numbers carried the team. I mean, literally. The carries led the NFL like 3 times. He was a beast. Just because the way he played, it shortened his career. But, he would try to run your absolute soul through the ground. And that's what I love about Earl Campbell. At number 3, a similar running back in Derrick Henry. 4-time attempts leader, 2-time yards leader, 2,000-yard season in his career, Offensive Player of the Year in 2020, that same season. And the 2019 playoffs are perhaps the most impressive aspect of Derrick Henry's entire career. He had 148 yards per game against 3 of the better defenses in the league, the Patriots, the Ravens, and the Chiefs. He had 148 yards per game in those 3 playoff games and was unstoppable in 2019 and 2020. Like, unstoppable. Nobody could tackle him. Like, he would get 100 yards. He was going to get it. And then eventually, he would break through in the fourth quarter and have a big run to seal the game. But unbelievable running back. I think he's the best running back. Him and McCaffrey are probably the best running backs of the last 10 years. Mike Munchak, offensive lineman who went on to become an offensive line coach, and actually the Titans coach, I believe, at one time. 8-time first-team All-Pro or second-team All-Pro in his career, and a Hall of Fame offensive lineman. Warren Moon is my number 5, the Houston Oilers all-time great and CFL legend, probably the best CFL player of all time. Warren Moon was a yards, touchdowns leader in Titan history, or Oilers history. 1991, 1992 yards leader with 4,600 yards. He was the touchdown leader in 1990, and he finished top 6 in MVP voting 3 times, and he was a 1-time Offensive Player of the Year. So during that 1990, 1992 range, he was arguably the best quarterback in the AFC. It's like him. Obviously, you had Marino, you had Elway, who were kind of peaked a little bit, but had a renaissance later in their career. And you had Jim Kelly and Warren Moon kind of at the top of their game right there. But Warren Moon was putting up numbies right there in the early 90s. And then you had Steve McNair as my honorable mention, the late great 2003 MVP with Peyton Manning. They had a tie because, of course, Peyton had to get his fingertips on the trophy. Rating and yards per attempt leader that season was Steve McNair. 3rd in MVP voting, also in 2002. And he had a Super Bowl appearance in 1991. He also holds the record for the most wins among all quarterbacks for the Oilers or Titans, which includes Warren Moon. So Steve McNair was awesome. And I think the biggest thing that I learned about him was, 3 different years where he won the MVP, he made the Super Bowl, or he was top 3 in MVP as well. So it wasn't just 1 or 2 years. He had a pretty darn good career for the Titans. Really athletic guy. He had a great arm. He could make great throws. I think the other day I was watching a Titans playoff game from 2002. And I think it was Steelers-Titans, 2002 playoffs. Steve McNair was Dyson. He was throwing beauty balls. A guy that I think I should go back and watch a little bit more because I mostly missed his prime, but really a really good player. And then the final list is the Washington Commanders' Sammy Baugh, who is arguably the greatest football player ever, guys. Sammy Baugh is number 1. Why? Well, let me put it this way. He was a quarterback. One of the greatest of all time. But he was also a punter. One of the greatest of all time. But he was also a safety. One of the greatest of all time. So if you put 3 of those things together, you have one of the greatest football players of all time, right? So he led the NFL in completion percentage 6 times, which means he was an accurate quarterback. Okay? Touchdown leader 2 times, yards leader 4 times, rating leader 3 times. He led the NFL in interceptions 1 time, not throwing the ball, catching it. Okay, so he led the NFL in passing touchdowns and interceptions on defense, and then he led the NFL in yards per punt 5 times. So he was the NFL leader in yards per punt 5 times. Passing yards 4 times. And interceptions 1 time. Sammy Baugh is a ridiculous athlete. Okay? Darrell Green is number 2. Darrell Green is number 2. I can't even say his name after going through Sammy Baugh's stats. Okay? Green is number 2. Most interceptions, tackles, and games played for the Commanders. One of the fastest players ever to play in the NFL. His makeup speed, his change of direction. I mean, this guy could run a 4.2 at 40 years old. Okay? One of the greatest corners in NFL history, Hall of Famer. John Riggins. The image you think of when you think of the Commanders, or not the Commanders, the different name, is John Riggins rumbling, bumbling, stumbling down the field in the Super Bowl, right? All-time leading rusher for the Commies, led the NFL in rushing touchdowns in back-to-back seasons in 1983 and 84, had 24 touchdowns in the year 1983, 614 yards, 4 touchdowns in 4 games in 1982 Super Bowl run. So again, 614 yards in 4 games in a Super Bowl run. You're playing against the best teams in the league. And then in 1983, he had 6 touchdowns in 3 games in that Super Bowl run too. So, I mean, darn good running back. Then we have Russ Grimm, who was a key member of the Hogs, which was the core fundamental reason the Skins, I guess, were a great team, right? 83 through 85, he had a 3-year first-team All-Pro stretch where he was one of the best guards in the NFL, and he had 3 Super Bowl rings throughout his Commander career. Dexter Manley is number 5, the best pass rusher for the Commanders in their history, all-time sack leader, second in Defensive Player of the Year voting in 1986, losing only to Lawrence Taylor in that historic season. 18.5 sacks in that season, 3 sacks in both Super Bowl winning seasons. 3 sacks in the playoffs in both Super Bowl winning seasons. So highly influential, not only in the regular seasons where he probably should have a Defensive Player of the Year if it were not for Lawrence Taylor, but then also really good in those playoff runs. And then at number 6, Art Monk. I couldn't leave him off the list as the all-time receiver for the Commanders franchise by 3,000 yards, which proves how much better he was than everybody else to play wide receiver for the Commies. And then he led the NFL with 106 catches in 1984 and was a Super Bowl champion. There it is, guys. Finally, we are done. That's part 2. Hopefully you guys enjoyed. Hopefully you learned something. Let me know in the comment section below your favorite players, your best players in your franchises, your favorite teams' history. Thanks for watching. It's Mitch. Gronk, spike the like button for more rankings. Subscribe, guys. We'll see you soon. Peace.